This one thing that you've never given any thought to could be ruining your novel. This one crucial element that you've left up to chance could be your undoing. That's what you get for being too far away from the action. You're not down in the trenches with your characters. Unless you've written a really far narrative distance, then being far away is probably fine. Narrative distance is one of those things that your novel inherently has, and if you haven't given it any thought, then it might not be serving you, or you might be bouncing between narrative distances without even realizing it. Let's start with some definitions so that you can get closer to understanding what narrative distance is. Have I taken these narrative distance jokes too far? I don't want to push people away. My goal here is really just to give you a 30,000 foot view of the subject. That's as close as I can get to... Okay, I'll stop. Narrative distance is really about the information that the narrator has access to. Further narrative distances mean less information. Closer narrative distances mean more information. This concept mainly applies to stories written in third-person perspective, but it is also relevant if you're writing in first-person perspective. In any story, regardless of the perspective, the narrator describing the story has access to all sorts of information. They know the names of the characters, they know the location where things are happening, they know the context of events, they may know what the characters are thinking or what their backstories are. How much of this information the narrator has access to is essentially your narrative distance. At very far narrative distances, we know very little. The narrator is basically just a camera hovering over the scene. Although if you're writing your description well, then you'll also get smells and stuff, so I guess the camera has smell-o-vision? If we don't know that the character's name is Trent Steele, if he's just described as the guy in the leather jacket on the motorcycle with nice delts, then that's a very far narrative distance. At a closer narrative distance, we may know the characters' names, their backstories, but not their internal thoughts. It's like a good friend or acquaintance of the characters is describing the scene. They know who these people are, they know external things about them, but they can't read their minds. They can't know what they're thinking and feeling. That guy in the leather jacket, that's Trent. He's super cool. You should watch him order a submarine sandwich. They give him extra cheese at no charge. At super close narrative distances, we see everything about the character. We know what they are thinking, we know what they are feeling. If a character loses control of their motorcycle because a jealous friend cut their brake lines and you describe the pain and disorientation of the crash, then that's a sign you've got a close narrative distance. If on the other hand, you simply describe the scene of the crash and the injuries that Trent sustains, but not how those injuries feel, then that's a sign you have a further narrative distance. You're a little bit further away. You can create many different effects with different narrative distances. If you want a bit more of a mysterious viewpoint character, then a further narrative distance can help because we won't know what they're thinking or why they're taking the actions that they're taking. It's like we're just following behind them as they read the post-it note they wrote a license plate number on and then take out their pair of metal shears as they walk by Trent's motorcycle. Closer narrative distances can help to get backstory information across. It can also aid in connecting with the character. We'll know more of what they're feeling and thinking, which can draw the reader in closer. Although the intrigue that you create with the more cloaked aspect of a further narrative distance can also create interest. It will get the reader interested, just in a different way. You can also use different narrative distances throughout the story, although you do have to be careful with this. I think this is best done when narrative distance is consistent from character to character. When you have different viewpoint characters, you can have different narrative distances, but the narrative distance for any one viewpoint character remains the same. For instance, your protagonist might be very close. We see and know everything about them. This may make the reader feel a bit closer. It will make your protagonist a bit more of a rounder character, all of which are good things. All of these things will make the reader like your protagonist a little bit more. To create intrigue and mystery, you may have another character skulking around with a bit longer of a narrative distance so that we don't know who they are or what they're doing. This can also be interesting. It'll create a lot of curiosity, but it won't necessarily make the character likable, and it may be harder for the reader to connect with them. They'll still be engaged because they're curious about what this mysterious person is doing, but they're not going to be as connected to the character. Switching narrative distances with the same character in the same scene to me just kind of makes it obvious that you're hiding stuff from the reader. It's like at one point you want to explain why they're cutting Trent's brake lines, so you have the character think about the falling out and how envious they are of Trent, but later on you want to create some intrigue about why the character says what they say when they're visiting Trent with Betty at the hospital, so you lengthen the narrative distance so we don't know what they're thinking, so they become a little bit more mysterious. It just creates inconsistency. Sometimes we know what the character is thinking or feeling, and other times we don't. This creates inconsistency. Sometimes we know what the character is thinking or feeling, and other times we don't. I don't think this is ideal. It's almost like head hopping in Third Limited, but within one character. Now, one thing that I think can work is starting at the beginning of the story with a much further narrative distance and then closing it in as the story progresses. As the reader sort of connects more with the protagonist, they start to see more of what they're thinking and what they're feeling, but that's different from jumping from close to far between scenes or between chapters. The same things apply in first-person perspective, where the first-person narrator might be giving us a lot of their thoughts or their feelings. It's really more of a case of how much the character is willing to open up versus how much information the disembodied narrator knows. I've talked before in different videos about having a sort of omniscient first-person narrator where the narrator's description of the story is colored by knowing all of the information about how the story plays out. They're able to retroactively make judgments and share opinions and information that they might not have had at the time because they've lived through all of the events and they're sort of retelling them. This is different from a more cinematic first-person perspective, which is a bit more present and could be interpreted as having a further narrative distance. I think with narrative distance, the biggest thing is just consistency, keeping it consistent between characters, making sure that you're picking a deliberate narrative distance to accomplish what you want to accomplish in your story. If you want the reader to connect more closely with a character, try a closer narrative distance. If you want to bump up the intrigue and the curiosity, try a bit further of a narrative distance. If you feel that people aren't connecting with the story, if they aren't really gravitating towards it, if it feels a little bit flat, that might be a sign that you need to move a little bit closer. Just like we've moved closer to the end of this video, because that's where we are now. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.